Electrical, I think I previously mentioned that there were some, largely we did our electrical code in 2017, but there were some further amendments around the edges to be consistent with this code. So recognition that there are now two types of emergency loads and standby power. So things like elevators, when they are on an emergency power system, can have a 60-second delay of switching over to the backup power. So that's going to allow some more reasonable sizing of those emergency generators or backup systems. We already mentioned the change around fire pump emergency power, more consistent with the model codes. And then there are some provisions to build upon some things we did in terms of alternative energy in our electrical code. Now, if you want to have on-site storage, so battery systems related to that, we adopted some provisions to provide for the fire protection of those rooms or spaces where those batteries are going to be located. That's the one piece of the International Fire Code that we did adopt in this round. Mechanical systems, mechanical code is going to be considered in phase 3. We recognize that there's some things about our mechanical code that continue to be out of date, and it's definitely on our list. We'll continue to consider mechanical code adjustments on a case-by-case basis through the alternative code approval or standards and test process. And just like we did leading up to this ordinance that I'm presenting about, the commissioner really would very much like to hear from industry with recommendations. I say top 10 because I don't want more than 10, but if you only have 2 or 3, that's fine. But I don't want a list of 100. So you can send that to dobcommissioner@cityofchicago.org, and we'll put those together as we're organizing for what may or may not be considered in phase 3 for changes to our mechanical code based on the 2018 International Mechanical Code. Plumbing systems, similarly, will be considered in phase 3. We have the plumbing material pilot program that's been ongoing for a while now. We continue to gather data there around the use of PVC and other alternative materials for plumbing piping. That will continue through December of 2019. Again, top 10 recommendations, send them to dobcommissioner@cityofchicago.org. We do want to hear from you. We do recognize that there are changes needed there, and it is building consensus with all of our industry partners about what those changes are and how we phase those in. Conveyance devices, this is an area where the substantive requirements of how they work were updated in phase 1, so that's not really changing. But some things about the spaces and rooms and layout of how they work in buildings is changing a little bit in this code. So new from the IBC, there will be a requirement and a little less higher thresholds for triggering it than the IBC. So in new buildings and additions with 6 or more stories or 2 or more basement levels, at least one elevator must accommodate a stretcher, and there's some dimensional things illustrated up there and guidance from your elevator providers about accommodating a stretcher. So we did recognize that there are some lower rise buildings that have smaller elevators and aren't going to meet that. So we did adjust that trigger, but it will be required in 6 or more stories or 2 or more basements. And then there's some clarifications in this code about the fire rating of elevator machine rooms that has been a topic that wasn't very clear in our code to this point. So some things that we did not adopt from the model code. So salespeople will come and tell you that you need to do these things. Now they're IBC based, but you do not. So elevator lobbies and elevator pressurization are not required in this code. So some of the things about the little screens or doors that close as supplemental things over elevator doors are not required in our code. Similarly, you aren't required to enclose the elevator lobbies. Fire service elevator requirements, we've had those in our code today for high-rise buildings, and they really stay Chicago-based. I think the one change in the fire service elevators is there's a new signage requirement. So the IBC fire service elevator requirements are much more technically difficult to meet. So I think there's probably a lot of good things about not adopting those for now. Special construction, this chapter covers specialized conditions, greenhouses like shown, walkways, tunnels, tents, temporary structures, membrane structures, broadcast towers, solar energy systems, fences, things like that. So there are very specific provisions on all of those if you have any of those in your project. The Chicago tent requirements are largely staying the Chicago tent requirements. Fences is a Chicago-specific provision that was put in there. But for solar energy systems, there's now some clearer things about what's happening on the building side, again, to build on technical requirements we put in the electrical code 2 years ago. And then the Chicago-specific provisions for fences continue. Public way, so this is an area where largely we don't regulate it at the Department of Buildings. Once you get into the public way, you have to work with CDOT and the Department of Business Affairs and Consumer Protection to get permission to use that space, but there are a few provisions in the building code and some pointers in the building code to refer to those sections. This will maintain the Chicago requirements about, in certain cases, the building department is the authorizing source for deep foundations that extend into the public way and some conditions related to vaulted sidewalks. And then new to this code is recognition of seasonal weather protection vestibules, so those little things they put outside. Often restaurants or retail spaces can be up for part of the year and are going to be of some kind of often fabric covered structure. So this provides some guidance about what those need to be from a building fire code perspective. Worksite safety and operations. So this is a chapter that's going to pull together some provisions, both from our existing code and from the model code about protecting not so much the workers on site, because that is regulated largely by OSHA or the Illinois Department of Labor, but this is about protecting neighbors and other building occupants if it's a partially occupied building. This is going to centralize some existing requirements and also bring in some new ones. Again, this is an area where we're going to have to work with the industry partners who are going to have to carry this out more on the contractor side than on the design professional side. So there are provisions in the code that it may be delayed in enforcement or have a different effective date. So we'll have more education out there around these requirements as we get closer to December